Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Palworld. That's it, right this way. Lots of attractions for you to see. Take a look around, but don't look behind the curtains.
Ahoy, I'm Captain Happy, and this is a video about Palworld. But more importantly, it's a video about a glaring problem in modern game design, using Palworld as a study piece. Ah, Palworld. This game had taken our collective consciousness by storm, and not always for the best reasons. This game was hotter than that buff UPS guy who always places your packages down gently so they don't get damaged. People fighting left and right about whether it's a ripoff or whether Nintendo should sue them over it. I'm not that stupid, and can recognize derivative works when I see them. See, I'm more interested in what this game has to offer, and what lessons we can learn from it. Much like your own trip through playing Palworld, and the entirety of this video will be, my first impressions of Palworld were a bit of a roller coaster. See, initially when I played this game, I ran into some immediately apparent and, let's just say, unique technical limitations that boggled my mind, frustrated me beyond belief, and also inspired me to write a video on accessibility. Primarily for how broken and messed up the control settings menu is. But then as I began to persevere through said limitations to actually get into the game, I was met with a swath of bugs and hilarious happenings that could mostly be attributed to the fact that the game is actually still in beta. But nonetheless, it inspired me to instead make the video a dunk view, in which I would show off the various ways the game is absolutely hilarious, and possibly not worth the hype. Maybe even dunk on those that think that this isn't legally distinct from Pokemon. But then, as I stopped laughing long enough to take in the world around me, and what this game truly has to offer, the world it portrays and the experience it offers, I realized. This game takes a lot of elements from each of the games that inspires it, and how that ends up making it a concoction ready-made for success, but destined for failure. And here's why. Palworld is the creation of Japanese company Pocket Pair, a company founded in 2015 by one Takuro Mizobe, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, a software engineer in Japan. Pocket Pair is responsible for a couple of games, many of which are still in beta or early access stages, but in particular they have an early access title called Craftopia. Craftopia is a showpiece of theirs that really embodies their goal as a game development studio, and the kind of games they like to make. In the synopsis of the game on Steam, they themselves describe that Craftopia is a game in which we combined many features we find enjoyable, such as hunting, farming, hack and slash, building, automation, to develop this game. Craftopia boiled down is fundamentally, what if Ark Survival Evolved's crafting and survival systems, as well as the dinosaur catching mechanics, existed in the game engine of Breath of the Wild. They then mixed in an industry-focused expansion of the crafting tech tree based on titles such as Factorio and Satisfactory for that extra little spice of life. There are a bunch of inspirations that Mizobe cites, such as The Forest, Terraria, Minecraft, Rust, Raft, Valheim, Astroneer, and even RimWorld, which all paint a very clear picture of the kind of gamer and developer he is. His inspirations can clearly be gleaned from his works. And the reason I bring this up is to say that Mizobe is primarily focused on developing games that combine features found in other games he enjoys. Using this method, they've made a game that could effectively be called the precursor to Palworld. As Mizobe states himself, our previous title, Craftopia, was an open-world survival craft game, so I started out on Palworld having accumulated significant knowledge on the genre. As such, Palworld is, boiled down to its core components, Breath of the Wild with the mechanics, systems, and setting of Ark, but if the dinosaurs were Pokemon. Now knowing what makes up Palworld, we can take a look at what it drew from those inspirations and whether it took the lessons from the developers or whether it merely copied their homework without understanding it. The game feels largely like Breath of the Wild in terms of control scheme and world interaction, including familiar staples such as stamina-based climbing and paragliding. The game contains, akin to Craftopia and inspirations such as Ark, a sound motif primarily comprised of the peaceful and serene noises of nature interspersed with esoteric high-pitched piano chimes. The sound choice is, again, like much of the project itself, highly derivative of its inspirations, almost to a point of being too similar. It's almost lifted verbatim from its source. These implementations of ideas taken from games Mizobe loves are taken almost as is from their sources, and end up feeling a bit like a theme park ride or a Potemkin village. You know, the concept of a fake town that's just wooden cutouts.
And as you can see here to your left, the Pokemon portion of the experience. Oh, look, isn't it lovely? Oh, don't look behind it. Here, next we have the crafting experience. Oh, isn't this a show?
To explore these points, let's dissect each of the main inspirations and see the comparisons we can make. Starting with Breath of the Wild is a good place to start, being the foundational inspiration for the game's base mechanics, control scheme, and world design. Breath of the Wild is a critically acclaimed title with a lot to draw from. It's no surprise developers in the recent years have taken such inspiration from it and created derivative works and spiritual successors. The combat within Breath of the Wild is extremely diverse, with the player able to hold only up to a maximum number of assorted weapons and tools that they can buy or find all over the world. Each of these weapons and tools have their own durability value that, upon hitting 0, causes the item to break, removing it from your inventory. With no way to repair items, this places value in every point of durability that an item has. These systems work together in a very cohesive way to create an extremely dynamic combat loop filled with large amounts of player agency and risk-to-reward choices to make. Palworld may look and feel at first like Breath of the Wild, but closer inspection reveals that the combat mechanics are where that comparison draws fairly short. The reasons these systems were implemented in Breath of the Wild are not understood by the developers. Palworld's developers understood that a tool shouldn't last forever, and thus they have durability values. But these tools are crafted by the player rather than found. These tools are not lost once broken, and can be repaired at any time. With the tools being so tenacious, it reduces the value of their durability from, I have X amount of usage in Y item left, I'd better use it purposefully, to, I am required to go home after X amount of time to reset the health on my equipment. The player in Breath of the Wild is required to manage a few equipment slots to not only have the tools that they think they need with them, but also to be able to carry the awesome weapons they want to have with them. Palworld features an inventory capable of containing any item, so the difference between the equipment slots and inventory slots is practically non-existent. This allows players to carry any number of any item or tool they want, completely losing out on the point as to why equipment in Breath of the Wild is designed the way it is, why only so many items can be carried, why they break. These features play into the fact that weapons and tools can be found all across the world in various places. They are all replaceable by nature, which creates the dynamic experience. Part of that dynamic experience is in how each of the weapons and tools operate. The weapons and tools each have their own swing patterns, giving the player a large and dynamic range of choice in how to engage with their encounters. Palworld's equipment falls so very short of this goalpost, it's almost not worth talking about. The weapons and tools almost all perform the exact same swing with the exact same hitbox. No combos or follow-ups, just swing. No positional maneuvers, just dodge roll. No targeting or locking onto an enemy that gives you extra dynamic control over the flow of combat, just WASD and click. This all leads to an extremely boring and unenjoyable experience. Now, let's take some steps back away from the mechanical design, and let's look at the world design instead. See, this is where I get taken back and blown away a little bit by Palworld, as the world design and the attention to detail on the landscape showcase a deep understanding of the design philosophies behind the world of Breath of the Wild, learning from its developers about what they did right with its design and how to lead a player on their own quest. The world Palworld takes place in is a vast and open-ended landscape that is accessible to the player at all times. The world is continuously visible at all times. Every location on the map contains accessible high peaks that just beg for the player to climb to their top, just tall enough amongst the other peaks that the player could take a look around and just take it all in. The different areas of the world are clearly distinct from one another at a distance, the landmarks are gigantic and overlooming, the waypoints all glowing enticingly and visible in the distance. These design choices are a crucial factor to what makes an open world experience good. Breath of the Wild and Palworld are both largely open-ended game experiences, with a major plot to follow if you so choose, but an entire world to explore. The player only really has the main plot's worth of things to do, but yet an entire world of stuff to go and find and do. An open world game can only drag the player along so far before the player is not enticed by the story anymore and will attempt to seek their own quests and goals. Open world games often suffer from this problem where, even though the player is surrounded by stuff to do, they aren't directed to any of it and therefore go, "What do I do?" Breath of the Wild and Palworld, with their openly visible world designs, gargantuan landmarks, and bright, enticing waypoints, encourage the player to embark on their own quests when they see a shiny tower in the distance and go, "I want to see what's there." Incentive for the player to actually create their own attainable goals is a crucial component to these kinds of games that I'm afraid a lot of developers haven't figured out yet. The larger issue then becomes vividly apparent when you actually venture out into the distance in Palworld, only to find that, while the game is good at mimicking Breath of the Wild's world and incentive design, it lacks substance, feeling largely empty and devoid of flavor. Many of the locations one can see in the distance and make their way to are just another random nature location with a couple of random pals nearby and a Liftmonk statue. Sometimes there's a cave. Alternatively, there's the Syndicate Towers, but those are the main plot. Heck, the giant and overlooming landmarks aren't even accessible. The points of interest in Breath of the Wild, in contrast, have a large amount of substance to them, either being some kind of puzzle, a dungeon, a hidden item, a colorful NPC, and so on. Palworld's points of interest feel vapid by comparison, and this is where the feeling of the Potemkin village starts to set in. I suppose I should at least take some time to explain the idea of a Potemkin village. See, legend has it that in 1787, there was this Russian nobleman by the name of Grigory Potemkin. He was favored by and one of the lovers of Empress Catherine the Great. One day, she was going to take a boat ride down to some land that he was supposed to colonize but failed at. Panicking, Grigory decided to put up fake wooden facades of buildings and imported peasants and livestock from central Russia. She would arrive and be greeted by all of this, saving his reputation. Despite the low probability that the story is true, the phrase Potemkin Village continues to be used today to mean something that is an impressive facade, hiding behind it a dark truth or a lack of actual substance. History lesson aside, let's move on to... See, one of the key differences between Breath of the Wild and Palworld's world is in one design choice. Palworld has a feature from Ark that allows you to spawn at a number of different locations across the map, but only after you die one time. You always begin your game at the starting location, where the main plot quest begins. This means that not only is every location effectively approachable from anywhere, but it also means that a very large portion of the world is just more starter area with the same pals. There aren't even different pals in the other spawn locations, aside from this one fire creature, making each of them feel like a bland reproduction. The only thing setting them apart from each other is the immediate availability of resources that just creates an artificial difficulty, and nobody likes that. The multiple spawn points feature that has been taken from Ark doesn't mix well with the other features and world design chosen. In Ark, the multiple spawn points serve as a way for players joining into a public server containing many people to have a selection of where to begin, so they don't all spawn in the same place and have a camping problem or something. Palworld feels much with its friendly and team-based non-PvP design as if it's made for a group of friends to enter into and take on the world, as opposed to the MMO nature designs of Ark that ask you to tribe up with a few against everyone else on the server, keeping primarily to your claimed location. To further emphasize this difference, Breath of the Wild's world is designed around a home location that the player sets out from on their journey to the enticing location that they saw in the distance, and then will return to after they have found whatever is there. With Palworld's home being able to be placed anywhere, as well as the player being able to spawn all around the map, combined with the points of interest being so repetitive in nature as a result, this strips away a key portion of what made exploring the world of Breath of the Wild so amazing and memorable in the first place. When the player sets out to a point of interest, they may have to stop and make a makeshift camp and wait out the nighttime halfway through the trip, valuing the player's home location and where it is bound to. That feeling is lost when you can just place your home anywhere you want. The features don't mesh well, and more attention needs to have been paid to why these features were so good in their own respective titles. When you have a world design built around exploration, the rest of the game design needs to complement that choice. These aren't the only examples of mechanics or features that have been loosely taken and implemented at almost a superficial value, and we'll get into one of the more egregious offenders later. But for now, finishing up the comparisons to Ark, from which Palworld draws heavy mechanical inspiration. In Ark, the players are stranded in a primitive world filled with dinosaurs and gargantuan prehistoric-style beasts. The player can craft different means of subduing and taming these beasts, store them at their home base, get them to be work animals, and even craft these little handheld storage containers that you can store the beast in and take out at your convenience. These objects remind you of anything? While not unique to Ark, it is also known for its crafting system. The way engrams, what they call crafting recipes, are learned via points given to the player after leveling up. Leveling up by crafting, harvesting, or killing monsters, improving the player's stats 1 point at a time, it's all done pretty verbatim. The points available to the player are pretty forgiving in Palworld, which is pretty nice, but if the player is given enough points to get pretty much everything, then why bother giving them points instead of just the recipe? See, in Ark, players are given a limited number of points with which to unlock recipes. This forces players to choose carefully which recipes they want and which they think they need in order to survive and thrive. Not being able to unlock them all forces the players to have to work together to be able to craft everything and have all tools at their disposal. This makes sense in a game in which servers are free-for-all MMOs. With the points being so plentiful in Palworld, and again with its play-with-your-friends-natured designs, it defeats the purpose of the largely MMO-centric mechanic. There's almost no reason to have borrowed this particular mechanic from Ark. The borrowed and superficially implemented features here feel again largely like the Potemkin village I mentioned. You walk in, the place looks real nice, you think, wow, this sure looks fantastic. I wonder what this building looks like on the inside, and you open the door to find only emptiness and unfulfilled expectations. But that comes from the perspective of these design shortcomings being intentional. Unintentionally, this ends up being what is referred to as a cargo cult. A quick history lesson on cargo cults without going into too much detail. Back in the post-war era, and even still today, people found villages of isolated tribes that had formed an unhealthy obsession with modern things that they themselves did not have. In their lands are strange, holy sites for rituals and prayers that are often shaped like airport runways, complete with non-functional satellite dishes and even wooden plane and tower replicas. They show up with the word USA painted across their chest and fake guns made from painted sticks. Then they perform their prayers and rituals looking up to the sky wishfully. The idea being that they are revering the modern man for landing there during war times and giving the locals some of their cargo. Over generations, this has developed into an unhealthy ritualistic obsession that could easily be classified as a cult, convinced that someday their prayers will be answered and planes will arrive to give them free stuff. The term cargo cult is used to describe the practice of or creation of something that resembles another well-known thing, but with the substance or meaning completely lost. An almost fanboy-esque fawning over something that is loved, remade as a facade, unknowing of the fact that the meaning is all but entirely lost or bastardized beyond recognition. The more you dig deeper into Palworld, the more like a cargo cult it becomes. Continuing down this path of borrowed and superficially implemented features, gimmicks, and designs, let's move on to the comparisons between Palworld and... Let's get right to the facts. This isn't Pokemon. It looks and sort of feels like Pokemon at a glance, and you want it to be Pokemon, but it's not that you want this to be Pokemon. In reality, you wish Pokemon was this. Hear me out. Palworld gives us a unique look into a world that Pokemon could be. A look into a world that might contain these kinds of creatures and the realistic implications of humans living alongside them. A world in which human and monster square up all the time, much like in real life's history, and the concept of each killing one another is commonplace. A world where humans eat said monsters and interact with and use them in the ways that the Pokemon world only merely implies. In Pokemon, what's the one thing you always wanted to do? That's right, attack the other trainer. In Palworld, fights with monsters and humans alike each put the trainer in the kind of danger you'd expect in a real Pokemon battle. Palworld gives us a taste of what that experience could be like, and it's delicious. The other reason it's what you wish Pokemon games were like is because of the real-time mechanics of travel and combat. See, Nintendo recently put out a title called Pokemon Legends Arceus, which features some real-time mechanics in travel and combat initiation. The points in which a player is walking around, sneaking near Pokemon, thinking about what tactic to approach with, and throwing Pokeballs is honestly the most exciting part of and probably one of the biggest selling features of Pokemon Legends Arceus. The freedom of control and agency the player is afforded make them more engaged with their actions and the game as a whole. You know when the player suddenly loses that engagement, agency, and control? When combat begins. It goes right back to being a turn-based game. This is where Palworld gives us a taste of the good stuff, showing us what it would be like if a Pokemon game had a fully active combat system, where the trainer is in just as much danger as their Pokemon, if not more, having to dodge attacks and be aware of their surroundings, and it is clear with the sales numbers that this is exactly what people are craving. But that's where Palworld falls off the edge, and one of the reasons I see people dropping the game after only a few hours of play. It's not a Pokemon game. That's not to say the game falls short because it doesn't have the name or branding, but that it lacks key features that are established norms in monster taming games. Picture this. You're starting up your old Pokemon game that you put the better part of a year, maybe more into. You're at the end of the game, and you've beaten all of the gym leaders. You open up your roster and the fond memories come back. That level 5 Pokemon you got at the start is now your star champion. Akin to the bug collecting origins of Pokemon, the caterpillars you caught, now butterflies, each with their own stories. You probably have names for at least one, if not all of them. Naming things strengthens one's attachment to them after all.
Once you name it, you start getting attached to it.
Palworld lacks these features that would enable the tamer to truly connect with and befriend their monsters, from being unable to name them to the fact that they don't evolve or grow with you as a player, causing you to have to leave them behind in favor of something bigger and better that you are destined to eventually replace as well. It forms a cycle of uncaringness, and it bleeds into the rest of the game. When the player is unable to form a bond with what is supposed to be their ally and friend, they instead shirk caring and treat them like tools. Upon the missing features that make Pokemon so enjoyable is battling. Of the main features of monster taming games, this one is crucial, building your team of monsters you have grown up with and formed bonds and connections with to face against another player's carefully crafted team. This is the literal peak of the monster tamer game design. What's the point of being able to build a team of fighting monsters, especially with your friends, if you can't challenge each other to see whose team is the best? And see, this is where Palworld really starts to feel like a cargo cult creation, where the idea of something familiar has been taken without the actual knowledge of what made it so good in the first place. It falls a bit into the uncanny valley, being recognizable as the inspiration, but with the soul of it missing. Modern game design is seeing a dip in creativity. Games end up becoming hodgepodge amalgamations of unrelated and often contradictory systems, where the very essence of what makes those systems good in the first place are either sacrificed or ignored for the sake of being able to include the feature. Whether it be a Potemkin village for marketing's sake or a cargo cult made by a gamer geeking out about the games they love, the lack of substance is easily felt after a short time playing the titles. But by that point, the producer has already made their sale. They bring in record-breaking numbers of sales at launch, boosting their numbers and fattening the company's wallet, and then they leak players until there's no interest left and the game sits in early access forever. Conclusively, Palworld is not the worst game out there, and it is still in beta, but it is representative of this larger issue we are seeing in modern game design, and even in a lot of modern media, where the novelties of this idea with that idea, or this media plus this media, end up becoming empty, soulless recreations of the very things that make them up. In the end, it feels like actual creativity is getting harder to come by these days. But let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm Captain Happy, and if you enjoyed this video and want to see more game analysis videos and maybe even some voice acting and audio plays, consider subscribing to my channel. And as always, whether you have a drink, smoke, food, or even nothing at all, cheers.